Today I will give you a brief overview of 3 common cortisol tests and share with you one more extra alternative way to assess your cortisol and stress level. So let's start with the most basic one and the fastest one. Simple cortisol blood test. Definitely easy to do. You can do either from finger prick or pop in any of the laboratories. Literally every laboratory will do the cortisol test for you. You also get the results pretty fast, usually within 1-2 days max. Also, most likely it will be covered by your health insurance or if you ask your doctor. But if you would like to do that privately, it's also not that expensive. It's around like £50 in UK and around $60 in US. However, there are quite few limitations of doing the blood test. And personally, I wouldn't recommend if you really want to get good understanding and insights about your cortisol. So the problem with the blood test is that it shows only one point in time. And the thing is, cortisol fluctuates during the day. In the morning, it should be at the highest and then should gradually drop towards the end of the day. So here, what is important, if you decide to go ahead with like the normal blood test, take a note when the sample was collected, because that's important in terms of like interpreting your result. Because there are different optimal ranges depending time of the day, within like 1 hour after waking, 2 hours after waking, and then later in the day. So if you don't do that, that can lead to like false interpretation. The other limitation of cortisol blood test is that it shows only like the total cortisol, and that can actually mask the level of your free circulating cortisol, which is like, I would say, the most important, because the elevated levels of the free cortisol is the one that is actually damaging to our body if of course it's elevated for a prolonged period of time. If you have done cortisol test plus cortisol binding globulin all together, you would be able to work out what's the free cortisol level. But cortisol binding globulin is quite expensive test. I think it's around 100-200 depending on the country, of course. So if you had to pay that much, then it's definitely better to go with like the Dutch test, which I will cover in a second. So personally, I don't think it's a very useful test in terms of getting insights about your cortisol, because in most cases it comes like normal within the range. Why actually it's not the case. Anyway, then the second one, a bit more, I would say, insightful, is diurnal cortisol test. It's a saliva test and you can also do it from home. It's definitely a good thing. It also shows you the daily pattern of your cortisol with 4 or 5 collection points. And if you do privately, it's only marginally more expensive than a standard blood test. It's around like 70-80 pounds, and similar price in dollars. Diurnal cortisol test can be good if you, for example, experience sleep problems, because if, for example, the test results show you higher levels of cortisol towards the end of the day, then definitely you know that cortisol is contributing to your sleep problems, waking up in the night or getting that restful sleep. However, diurnal cortisol test, despite being better than blood test, it still doesn't show you metabolized cortisol. And that's important because, for example, if your body produces a lot of cortisol, but then is able to metabolize it well, it will not cause that much of the damage to your like health hormones, comparing if your body was producing a lot of cortisol but was not able to metabolize. So if you want to have full understanding of like cortisol production, cortisol levels and cortisol metabolism, this will not do the job, but overall like it's a decent, I would say, good cortisol test. And then the last one, a Dutch adrenal test. So that, I would say, the most comprehensive, most insightful and advanced test, because it shows you the daily cortisol pattern. On the top of that, it shows you the breakdown of the free metabolized cortisol. From the markers that are measured in the Dutch adrenal, you also are able to identify if your body is under chronic stress. It shows you DHEA as well, which is like the marker for like adrenal health. DHEA, for example, can have that protective effect against the cortisol. So if you have low levels of DHEA, that can set you on a path of more damage as well, if of course the cortisol elevation is chronic. And when you do the Dutch test, you can also get the add-on for cortisol awakening response. So cortisol awakening response is kind of like mini stress to measure the sensitivity of our body to stress. And if it's elevated, also indication of so-called anticipatory stress, which is linked to basically with worrying and how our like thoughts can how our mind can create that stress. So that test definitely one of the best, most comprehensive and insightful. It can also be helpful if you struggle with belly fat, adrenal fatigue, sleep problems, and if you go with like the female hormones option as well, it will give you insights if your hormones are contributing to PMS, painful periods, any other hormone related symptoms. Of course, there are some downsides and mostly related to basically a price and turnaround time. So that is definitely more expensive than regular like the blood test. The cheapest one you can get for around £200. If you want to go with the female hormone add-on, it starts from £250 till £320, depending if you go with like the cortisol awakening response or not. And turnaround time is also quite long. It's usually 3 weeks. Sometimes 2, but usually something between 2 and 3. And then the last, I would say, alternative way to get insight about your stress and cortisol, but it's not a test itself. It's basically using Oura Ring. So it's definitely not a diagnostic tool, but it's quite helpful to understand how your body reacts to certain situations during the day, and also how much time your body spends in a stressed zone, and also how much your body spends in a relaxed, restored zone. So obviously, if you spend significantly more time stressed and not much in restored, it's very, very likely that at some point you will have problems with like high cortisol and all other hormone related symptoms. But again, not diagnostic tool, just something I start using personally and find super helpful in terms of like managing stress.